Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back to Conscious Construction, the Conscious Enneagram podcast. My name is Abby Robbins, and I'm here with...
Kimberly Culbertson.
Hooray.
Hooray.
And today we're talking about Type 9.
Type 9.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Woo. Just like we did it in the last episode, we're going to talk about the dominant center, the repressed center, and the conflict resolution style for the type, just to give you a sense of, to give you kind of a deeper sense of what the type looks like, how the type might show up, some of the struggles, some of the gifts. Let's just dive right in. So we're still in the body triad. So we talked about 8 last round. Now we're in 9. And even though we're still in the body triad, I think that it's really important to note how differently the types in the body triad really show up.
I think more so than the other triads, people are like, wait, what? Like only the 8 is like definitely body triad.
Yeah.
And you know, the body triad is known for struggling with anger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so 9s often are like, what?
What do you mean? I'm not angry.
I struggle with anger at all.
Where like everybody, we talked in the last episode, everybody pins a problem on the way 8s deal with anger.
Right.
Because it's so much more out there. You know, they are in touch with it, they express it. But then they move on from it.
Right.
Or they allow it to be generative. And sometimes it's not, but, you know, they are expressing it and moving on. Where 9s
are kind of at war with their anger.
That's a good word. That's a good way to put it.
They're experiencing it, and then they're talking themselves out of it just as fast. They're trying to get in front of their anger. Like, I don't really feel angry about this. And so they put off. They're not willing to act on the anger. And so then what 9s are kind of classically known for is they're not angry at all. You never thought they were angry until they're very angry. And so all of a sudden it's an explosive anger over something that seems sometimes very little.
Yeah.
And it's because their anger has built while they ignored it and didn't honor it and repressed it and pushed it down and told themselves they were wrong. And so eventually it boils over. And then they'll say, like, when I'm angry, it's very loud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And often, I think it's important to note that 9s are, like, everyone is surprised.
Right.
When a 9 is angry, like, it's not like they knew and they were holding on to it and they were trying to, like, push something down. It really is an ignorance, right?
Yeah, they really
don't know.
They really did talk themselves out of their anger.
And truly, they talk themselves out of a lot of their feelings, right? But like anger is kind of the thing that really is most present for the body types,
right.
And so that's really where we sit. And by pushing themselves away from their anger, they're also they're distancing themselves from their body as well.
From their body, from their emotions. Yeah. The word I often think about with 9s is the word pleasant. Like they're not willing to feel anything too intense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
even good things,
because that feels dangerous. So like where you might pick a different word like exhilarated or joyful, you really wouldn't get that either unless they're doing a lot of work, because they don't trust that they will be accepted in their fullness. And so to be accepted and to stay in relationship, they're called the peacemaker in a lot of traditions, and they're just looking for everything to stay kind of steady. They want like a calm sea.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of 9s, excuse me. We were just talking about 8s. 9s really can create a lot of space for people because of their willingness to kind of set themselves back, like to step back. And in a lot of ways that can be a gift. Like 8s or 9s. God, I keep saying 9.
The 8s are also a gift, and the gift is so very different from the 9. You would almost think like they can't possibly be in the same center.
Yeah.
And yet
they are. I think one thing, that I was trying to get to with this 9s, like distancing themselves from their bodies. 9s are the quintessential space case. 9s are the type that are like lights are on but nobody's home sort of thing. Like you can be sitting and having a conversation with a 9 and like it becomes very clear like halfway through that like, oh my God, you were so like, you're not even here. You're not even listening. Like you might have a smile on your face and you might be doing this, but like you are actually somewhere totally different.
Yeah, because they're not willing to, they're not going to exit the conversation to protect themselves necessarily. So they'll exit it in their mental life.
Yeah, and I think what happens is by distancing yourself from your body, you're also distancing yourself from your own sense of vitality. And so when I work with nines, they always kind of report having very low energy. I think of all the types, nines have the least amount of energy because they are disconnected from their bodies.
They really don't trust their energy when they have it.
Yeah.
They don't want to be too much. And so I think that lack of trust, they've really disconnected, even in a physiological way.
Yeah.
They just don't have access to it. And when they do have too much of it, it feels scary.
Yeah, and that actually plays out. I have a lot of clients. I teach that there's kind of this kind of dichotomy anytime we're talking about the types on the triangle, where we'll see in a moment, the nines' dominant center is also their repressed center. And so, like, even though they're reading everything through their body, they don't have a lot of access to it.
Yep.
And so what that ends up looking like is there's kind of this dichotomy that happens with the types on the triangle, where you might have a really low energy nine or a really high energy nine. But what happens is, like, if a nine does have a lot of energy, it's like they're using it in a way that they aren't actually in touch with. They're using their energy to do things that aren't necessarily theirs to do.
Or to do things that aren't risky or important.
I think important is the word.
You can have a lot of busyness.
Yeah.
But like how the thing goes won't ultimately ruffle any feathers, whether it goes well or poorly, But nines can be really intensely into hobbies that don't rock any boats,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so in doing that, they stay very, very busy. So sometimes people say that nines are lazy, and I think it's kind of a miscaricature. Nines are often really hard workers.
Yeah.
But they're reticent to do the things that matter the most.
Yeah.
Because those feel emotionally heavy, and they feel like they could go wrong, and then people might be upset, and so they can have access to their energy more on behalf of things that don't feel as tense.
Yeah. So we'll move right into, nines as body repressed as well, because that's kind of how we're talking about it. It's really hard to parse out the difference between body dominant and body repressed with the nine, because they're essentially both happening simultaneously.
Right. Yeah.
Peter O'Hanrahan says that when we look at the types on the triad or the anchor types, the dominant center is not available for personal use. And I think that's maybe the best description of what's happening for nines, threes, and sixes. And so, nines have this like repressed center that is the body. And how that shows up is like, one of the things I work with all of my nine clients on is like prioritizing, right? So the body is that is kind of the root of all like individuation. It's the root of all boundaries. It's the root of I am here and you are there.
Right.
And when that energy and that experience becomes repressed, you kind of are everywhere.
Yeah, you kind of merge with people.
Yeah, you're both merged with people, but you're also not, because you're not even existing. It's like there's this liminal space that you start to take up as a nine where, you're there, but you're not really there, but you're not really nowhere. And it's this like kind of like continual, like not there, but there. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is like the need to prioritize. And I think a lot of that shows up in how they're operating in the world, is like nines really struggle to say that one thing is more important than another thing, for that same like fear of ruffling those feathers or being disconnected, right? This is all a ploy to stay connected to other people.
Right.
But it doesn't work, like most things in the type.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think when nines are kind of in that space, they can be, especially if it's about themselves, prioritizing something that they need for themselves, that they absolutely can't find the language of it. They sometimes don't know what the priority is, because and especially if there's any fear of disconnection.
Yeah.
And so they will become almost non-existent in order to keep their connection, even if their connection's not good for them.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a strong faith that their presence matters there, that what they do is important and matters. And I feel like a lot of the work for the 9 is to find that voice and that sense of what they bring and how important it is and how much it does matter. And then out of that foundation, that prioritization can happen. But it takes bravery to show up as if you matter in a space, especially for a 9.
Yeah, and what we're really hitting on, this like body repression, it is this is kind of the core piece for anyone in the withdrawn stance, right? So like stance correlates to what center of intelligence is repressed or like inaccessible. And when the body center is repressed, you end up in the withdrawn stance. So 9s are in that group with 4s and 5s. And there is this sometimes it's this profound question of like, do I matter?
Right.
But it's almost always this underlying sense that like your actions don't have an impact. Right. So the withdrawn stance folks are, they need a lot of convincing to know that what they do has an impact. And this shows up in a lot of different ways. Like we see it happens differently for 4s and for 5s and for 9s. But for 9s, it's really like their feeling is that they don't matter.
Right.
So like good, bad, indifferent, it doesn't matter how they show up. So they're just not going to show up. Where, the flavor is a little bit different, both with 4s and 5s. And I think that is, that's probably what I work on most with my 9 clients.
Yeah. And I think for those of you who have a 9 in your life, it's really useful to kind of understand how much they often don't see why they matter in a room. And so if you want to care for your 9s, one of the ways to do it is to call out and point out when what they're doing matters, or when you need them to show up in a particular way, because it matters to you. And it reinforces to them that they matter, which is, of course, a gift, but it also helps them know how to show up in a way that you would prefer and need. And so that communication can be really, really a gift. I had clients once that were married, 2 9s married to each other. And like a lot of the coaching work that we did was around taking turns naming their needs, because usually 9s are in a duo where someone else is naming their needs and they're going along. Yeah. So if you have 2 9s in a duo and no one's naming their needs, sometimes that meant they both wanted the same thing, but nobody was able to say it. Yeah. And so literally we had conversations where they were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, both wanting to do the same thing, waiting for the other person. They're just stuck, and so being able to get to a place where you can say like, my needs matter, here's what I would like. And to know that they will not lose you by naming what they like, or what they want or what they need. It helps them have the space to grow the muscle. Yeah. And so like for the 9s listening, a lot of like your work really falls into like turning inward and understanding what it is that you want. Yeah. And I think what is so helpful is like the understanding that the only way for you to really be in connection is for you to show up in this way. Like there is such a deep fear of losing connection with 9s that it's almost like they do anything to stay connected. But things don't really start to change until they really internalize that they're not actually connected, right? Because they're not really there. Yeah, it can feel, especially like coming from an assertive stance place, it can feel hard to connect to a 9 because they feel kind of slippery and like far away. Like you're like, come, what do you want? Like, and they're like, I don't know, and they really don't know. Yeah. Some of the time, and so, then it feels like I don't know what to do here. I need something to act on, you know.
Yeah.
And so it can be really helpful for your people when you figure that piece out too.
Yeah.
Now that is not to say that nines can't be a force,
Oh, yeah.
because nines can be very, very stubborn. So the things that they will prioritize,
Yeah.
the things that are important to them, the thing that is really kind of excellent, I think, is that you really can't move them.
Yeah.
When they do put their foot down and they do pick their priority and they do know this is what's important, they have like a real strength of character to
Yeah.
stay in that spot.
Yeah. And I think it does show up most often as stubbornness. And I think and I'm like, for better or for worse,
Sure,
right?
sure.
Like that's how it shows up. I think one thing that can be really helpful for nines is that like the way that nines know what they want is often by getting really clear on what they don't want. Like it's like they have to kind of circle the wagons. They have to come around to it in this different way. Where other types might have more access to like, oh, this is what I want. Nines are like, well, I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want that. I definitely don't want that. It's almost like the power of deduction. Like you have to do some deductive reasoning. And so I really coach nines on like knowing what you don't want and getting clear on that and voicing that can be a great step to getting to what you do want. But you really have to, it is work to get it to come around to that place.
And I think that's where you really see the body center, because they know what they don't want in their body.
Yeah. And it's like,
so like
very strong.
Like even in little things like where do you want to go to dinner? Oh, I don't know, you choose. And then you go, okay, how about pizza? They go, no. Like they know. I don't want that. And so sometimes it's like a this or that game until your body is telling you what it knows, even though you don't know yet. You can kind of hack that body center. Yeah. Because it does know if you tune into it. Yeah.
I think the game, I'm married to a 4 who's also in the withdrawn stance. And what I will usually do to help her is that like as an 8, I can be a little overpowering and be like, but I don't want to like, surprise, surprise. I don't want to disrupt or I don't want to like cause harm to somebody with my like, you know, I'm very sensitive to that, especially around this, like, where do you want to go to lunch? I'm always like, how do you feel about this? You know, I'm like trying to be more gentle and open. But a lot of times with withdrawn stance folks, it's hard to find that. And so it's like, I have to watch myself to not over offer. Do you want this? Do you want that? Do you want this or that or those things? And my rule is I will offer 3 things. And if all of those are no, then I say, now it's your turn to offer something.
Right. How's that go?
Usually well. But I understand that like I am offering that is an invitation to work, right? For my withdrawn stance wife. But that is like that. I think that that's a really useful tool if you are in a relationship with a 9. And if you are a 9, like if somebody's offering things that you're like, no, like be prepared to figure out a yes. Yeah. Like what is the yes, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it is helpful to just have a very small, like set of options. I'm still very much stuck on the like, what's for dinner thing. And so it's like, okay, pizza, Chinese food, Indian food, tacos. Okay. Which one of those? You know, what are the things that like you and your partner or you and your family, like, what is it that like, where are your regular spots? And then like, can you use that to help you narrow down the options? Because that can be really hard for a 9, which kind of leads us into the conflict resolution style.
Yeah, let's do it.
And this is the way that this correlates. Let me get there. Is like, this came together in my brain and I'm like, oh, I'm going to have to explain that, like why this is connected.
Okay, we're ready.
But we're moving into the positive outlook triad, which is made up of 9s, 2s, and 7s. Yeah. But one of the things, like this is another piece that makes it difficult for 9s to make decisions, because essentially what you're doing when you make a decision is you're saying that one thing is better than something else.
Right.
And the positive outlook triad has a lot of trouble really like zeroing in on that.
I feel that in my bones.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, if to make a decision is to cut off something else. And that creates a lot of fear and anxiety for positive outlook types.
Yeah. When you're an assertive type, you can just do all the things for a season. We'll get into that with the 7. But when you're withdrawing type, and it's scary to cut off options because everything could be good.
Yeah.
Then,
or everything could be bad. Right?
Well, yeah, you don't want to make a choice that leads us to a not positive place. And I think that positive outlook also feeds into kind of that internal gaslighting of I'm not really upset because maybe they meant this. Like maybe they're just having a bad day.
Yeah.
Like the way that we kind of excuse certain things in the name of staying positive.
Yeah.
When you put that with the body repression and the that withdrawing stance, you get into a space where something's not positive.
Yeah.
But you're still
admit it.
Yeah, you're not ready to admit it, or you want to give it a spin or something.
I think I see this play out. We are operating on the educated guess that our oldest is probably a 9.
Okay.
And she can see the best in everyone, in every situation. It's almost. I mean, as an assertive type and as an emotional realness type, and she has 2 parents who are emotional realness, it's infuriating. It's infuriating, right? Like it is the worst thing. But, to talk a little bit more about what the positive outlook triad is, it's like when like the conflict is over as soon as you find the silver lining, right? That's the signal to the positive outlook folks that like, okay, we're done. And once they find the silver lining, then they can signal to everyone else that like, oh, we're done. But that's not what everyone else is looking for necessarily.
Right.
So, 9s are trying to sidestep conflict by saying, well, it's not really here because this, or it's not really, it's not that bad, or it's not that, like, they're trying to spin it and reframe it differently than a 7 would, but they're trying to like shift it to be like, well, this isn't so bad because X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. And I mean, it is a gift to be able to find the positive in even really hard situations. But if you can imagine, now we've talked about the 8 and the 9. So if you're in a relationship 8 and 9 and one person to feel like a conflict is resolved needs to have that emotional realness of this is how ugly it was and how hurt I am and the piece that was broken, this is what is unacceptable about the situation. And then you're in relationship with a person who's trying to make that okay by saying, it's actually not that bad because look at what happened over here.
You can see how volatile that connection becomes.
Right.
And how painful it is for both parties.
Both people are in pain.
Yeah.
And so as we get into this and okay, one of my key people is their resolution style is so different than mine, then you can go, okay, we're going to get to the positive, but we're going to first acknowledge what's real.
Yeah.
And then once that's acknowledged, you can go, okay, I'm going to come with you on this journey towards the positive.
Yeah.
But we have to move toward each other to really resolve the conflict, especially when people are need different things out of the conflict,
Yeah. And again, we'll talk about this in the whole episode on the conflict resolution style, but like, it's very true that all pieces have to be in place for the conflict to be truly resolved. And so there is a gift that each type is bringing, but it's very easy to see like when only certain parts of it are coming together and we're not conscious of these things, we can really be in a lot of pain and inflict a lot of pain in our conflicts because we're not aware of these things.
Right. And if you only have one thing in play, you really never fully grow out of the conflict.
Yeah, it will always come back.
If you stay in the emotional realness, then you stay raw, but
it
doesn't always get better,
Yeah, if you always jump into fixing things with the competency triad, which we haven't talked about yet, but we will in the next episode, you don't acknowledge the emotional impact of what's happening, and truly you can't find meaning in what's happened. And I think that's what positive outlook types, especially 9s, can bring to the situation, is once you go through these other steps, the positive outlook folks are really great at helping us understand why we had to go through this.
Right.
Like with this, like, well, hey, this hurt and this sucked, but look at where we are now. Like they can really guide us to a brighter future.
And people often, to stay engaged, need to have some positive feelings.
Yeah, exactly.
And so once you get in, once you really have resolve to move into that positive outlook is really useful.
Yeah.
And again, we haven't really talked a bunch about the competency piece, but you need competency to not keep creating the same problems over and over. You can become very real and then very positive over and over and over again without ever fixing anything if you don't bring some competency into the situation. And so if you don't have that coming easily in your particular mix, then you might need, for example, a therapist who's going to say, here's some actual practices and tools that could make this better, because we do need all three. We need to know and be real about what's happening. We need competency to change the patterns, and we need a positive outlook to get back to good.
Yeah. So talking about the 9s, body repressed, body dominant. They feel things deeply in their guts, but they can't always respond from that place because of this kind of struggle with the, dominant being also repressed. We have the head and the heart center that are playing into their experience. And generally speaking, I've found that like 9s who have more access to their heart center tend to be more of the low energy 9s that I mentioned. Where 9s that have more access to their head center tend to be more high energy 9s. That's not always the case, but pretty close. And this conflict resolution style, they're really looking for things to be okay. Right. That's really the kind of thing that they want out of conflict. They don't want the conflict. They want things to be okay. And I think growth for 9s really has a lot to do with getting in touch with what they really want out of a situation and learning how to advocate for that and take action for that. And I think we talked about how you have to believe that what you do matters and that you matter and that what you want matters in order for that to take place. Yeah.
And I will just add that 9s need a lot of permission to change their mind because they often don't think they're upset at first. So one of my close people is a 9. And so when something crazy is happening, she will go out of her way to explain to us, like, it's really okay. I'm actually okay with this. Everything's totally fine. But then a couple of days later, it'll hit. Yeah. And we all know it's coming in my family. Like, she just doesn't know yet that she's, like, viciously upset about this. But then when it hits for her, she's surprised. Yeah. And sometimes we have to be like, it's okay if now it's not okay. Yeah. Like, you really aggressively wanted it to be okay. Yeah. And we let you say that, even though it wasn't okay. But now we're going to let you change your mind about it. Yeah. And we're going to let it be real and like help walk you into the grief of like, I couldn't actually positivity whitewash this, like I couldn't. Yeah.
I do find that there is a lot of grief with 9s like realizing how much they've missed out on.
And a lot of disappointment. There's a lot of just hoping it'll be okay or hoping it's not as bad as it seems. And then eventually there's just a graveyard of disappointment.
Because it only is those good things if you show up. I think that's what's key. Yeah. Thank you all for listening. If you liked this episode, if you found it helpful, be sure to click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to keep in touch with the next episodes that are coming out. Drop a comment below. Let us know if you've got a 9, if you are a 9, what you think about 9s. You can find all my information at consciousenneagram.com. Schedule a typing interview or client work, and you can find Kimberly
It's at Kimberly and Coach on Instagram and LinkedIn.
Yeah, you can find all that information in the comments below, and we'll see y'all in the next one.
Cheers.